email? What does it mean?
Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news.
The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place.
Conversation is the oral exchange of sentiments, observations, opinions, or ideas.
Forbes Books Radio presents The Conversation with Clinton M. Padgett.
Joining me on The Conversation is Karyn Buxman. Karyn is an international speaker, best-selling author, self-diagnosed chocoholic, and the real reason I'm so excited to talk to her today is she's a neurohumorist. She's a pioneer in the field of applied humor. Karyn is one of only 227 people in the world, one of only 39 women to be inducted into the National Speakers Association Speaker Hall of Fame. That's a mouthful. She has received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Applied and Therapeutic Humor. Didn't know there was one. Glad to know it. Karyn serves on the advisory boards of the Invisible Disabilities Association and the American Happiness Association. She's also the co-founder of the World Laughter Tour. Karyn, thank you so much for joining me on The Conversation today.
Clint, it's so good to be here with you.
It's been a long time coming. I'm so happy. We've known each other for a few years now.
Been a minute,
and we finally got to make it. Exactly. So let's start with the definition. What is how do you define a neurohumorist? I can't say it. How do you
because
define
I know
it?
Right now all your listeners are going, "Oh, come on, Clint, another neurohumorist." I mean, come on.
I already listened to the other one in the world. Come on, what is this? How you got them both on?
But I have been researching humor and the brain for over 30 years, and I live at that intersection of humor and the brain, how the brain affects humor, how the humor affects the brain. It's a bit of a loop. And, from that, pull out the benefits, holistically, physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, socially, even spiritually. And being at that intersection has allowed me to have some incredible insights on how people can use humor intentionally and strategically. And so whenever two or more are gathered in the name of humor, I want to be there.
Now, I read that your mission is to improve global health, business, and peace through laughter and heal the humor impaired. I love that.
Yes.
And this seems like it makes perfect sense to me since I know your background is in nursing. I think you have a degree in nursing as well as a Master of Science in Nursing and Mental Health. I like to think of all my guests as superheroes, and every superhero has a backstory. So how did you start off with a nursing, what led you into nursing, and then from there making this jump over to humor?
I was teaching at a college of nursing and needed to go back for my master's. I had to have a research project and a thesis. And through that, fell in, I know now that there are no accidents, but I had stumbled across just a small piece in a journal that was about a nurse researcher who had researched humor. This was back in the late 80s. And I'm thinking, what? I mean, quite frankly, the fact that you could maybe study something fun was very appealing. And it was that fun factor that drew me in, but the power of humor is what kept me there and is what really has driven me all of these years. And people started asking me to share my findings. And then one day somebody asked that wonderful question, how much would you charge to come speak for our group? I was like, wait a minute. People would pay me. I was the one who always had the grade card. Karyn would be such a straight A student if she just didn't talk so much. So I finally found the niche where I was just so good at this. And I thought I'll give it a year. And if it doesn't work, I can always go back to academia. And that was over 30 years ago. It has taken me from Burbank to Bangkok. I've spoken to audiences of less than 10 and worked with clients one-on-one, to audiences of over 10,000. One in particular had 78 countries represented within that one audience. And what I found is that humor and laughter are universal languages. And it's such a wonderful connector. And I continue to do research. I just finished a research project recently with UCSD, very much loving the left brain part of this, but I live also in the right brain part. And I love helping people connect those two.
That's why you're a perfect guest for the show, because that's what I'm trying to do as well, is maybe give some of the social skills to some people who are more math focused or science focused, if you will.
Yes.
Now, who were some of your early influencers or mentors that guided you in the pursuit of this?
Interesting you should say that. One of my early mentors was Zig Ziglar. And the reason was, he was amusing, but I came from an industry where we focused on other people's goals, but there was no mention of having your own goals. And that was such a brain cramp for me. And so, his encouragement to set goals for myself. And I remember when I graduated from grad school and I set goals. It was like, okay, in 5 years, I want to be a national expert. 10 years, I want to be an international expert. And a paper came across my desk, a letter. I don't even know how they got my name, but it was an inquiry about presentation of papers in Paris, France. And I remember thinking, well, I'm not qualified to do that right now, but in 10 years, I'm going to be an international expert. So I should start practicing now. So I filled it out, and 6 weeks later was invited to come present in Paris, France. It was like, whoa. I've had a number of wonderful mentors. One, Dr. Lee Burke, who studied under Norman Cousins, who really was the springboard for the field of psychoneuroimmunology, spelled just like it sounds. And that is probably better known as the mind-body connection. And back in the 80s, there was still so much resistance to that mind body, oh, that's so woo woo and stuff. And now everybody just understands that we are such an integrated whole being, that every single part of our body is connected to other parts, and that our cognitive part of our brain is connected to the emotional part of our brain, which affects the social interactions that we have, et cetera. So Dr. Lee Burke, Vera Robinson, who was the person that I came across her little bit of research on humor, became somebody that I studied and researched. And later she wrote a chapter for one of my books. And so it felt like it came full circle. And, there's a lot of people who have been mentors in my life. Brendan Burchard, I've been in a mastermind group with him, and some of the others who have helped me grow and expand how I can really focus more on the intricacies and the processes of what I know and reach a larger audience. And I really do feel like what I have for people can be life-changing for them on a one-on-one basis. And I think it can change the world for the better. I absolutely know that in my heart. And so that's why I'm so passionate about this. And retirement does not fall into my vocabulary, because even when I get too tired to throw my luggage in the overhead baggage compartment, now we have virtual, so I'm going to be able to just keep doing this till the last laugh.
Well, speaking of airplanes, I remember one of the stories in one of your books was about the flight attendant and how she used humor to turn a boring presentation we've all heard a million times into something people were actually paying attention to.
Yeah. And that's something, because one of the pushbacks that I get, three pushbacks are, I'm not funny. Nobody will take me seriously. And what if I cross the line? And in terms of nobody will take me seriously, people are under the impression that I think they confuse seriousness and solemnness. Because we know from airlines like Southwest, they can take a very important message. Their number one goal, the thing that is most important to them, is safety. Mm-hmm. And yet they can convey that very serious message in a humorous way. And when I was flying one of the first times on Southwest, and I heard somebody yelling, "All right, everybody, listen up." And I'm looking to see who's shouting. And then I look up front, and it's a flight attendant. And she said, there may be 50 ways to leave your lover, but there's only 4 ways to leave this plane. Now, some of your listeners are going to be too young to know what that means. And I'm going to say Simon and Garfunkel, and you're still going to be too young to even know who that is. So look up
Google
50
it,
ways
kids.
to leave your lover. But she just kept going. And she said, this is a non-smoking flight, but if you have to have a cigarette, you can go out onto the wing and watch today's feature, Gone with the Wind. If the plane suddenly descends, 2 oxygen masks will drop in front of you. If you're traveling with a child or someone behaving like a child, put your own oxygen mask on first. And if you're traveling with more than one child, pick your favorite. Everybody was laughing, and every single person was listening to the safety instructions that they had probably ignored on their last 50 flights. Because as business people, and we're doing lots and lots of travel, it's like, it just becomes like Charlie Brown's teacher. Wah, wah, wah. I hope some of you are too young to know what that is too. Go watch an old segment of Charlie Brown. Wah, 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 wah.
The teacher,
So it gets your attention.
For sure. Now, there was a title of another guy that was in your book at Google. I think Jolly Good Fellow was his actual title, which is just fascinating to me.
Chang-Ming Tan, who was Google's jollyologist, and self-proclaimed. But it was fascinating to me that somebody from Google would embrace this concept of humor and humanness. And everything about him is funny. And if you go read his bio and you look him up, and he has been nominated, he and his team, for the Nobel Peace Prize 5 times. And yet he is somebody who just sees everything through the lens of humor. And that's what I try to help people with. I work with high performers around the planet. And I remember one time a high performer who had high ticket sales, and he was out of Australia. And he came to me and he said, I want to be spontaneously funny. And I said, all right, well, let's work with that a little bit. And he did some speaking in addition to his sales, and he sent me videos of his some presentations. And I was so surprised because he was funny. His audience was laughing. One of the audience members threw out a line that he could use in future presentations. And he heard none of that, and he saw none of that. And this is a very important point. And that is the way our brains are wired. Our brain's number one focus and purpose is to keep us safe. It's to watch for threat. And we're hardwired to naturally see threat. We are not naturally scanning for, oh, what's humorous? Oh, what's funny? And until we tune in, a part of our brain, it's a little finger-like projection called the reticular activating system. And what this does is it gives us more of what we put our attention to. There is no judgment. It's a little bit like the internet. I'm on the internet and I go to Zappos, and man, do I find the coolest pair of shoes. And then it's like, I see the price, and it's like, whoa, not till the next paycheck. And so I go to a different web page, and what's on the side of the web page? There is an ad from Zappos with those shoes. They followed me. And so I go to a different page, and now those shoes have followed me, and another pair that looks a lot like them. And I go to another page, and there's those shoes, another pair, and a purse that would go perfectly. Now, the internet is not judging me, and I hope you're not judging me either, but it just gave me more of what I paid attention to. And that's what your brain does. So if you are constantly looking for threat or doom scrolling, as a lot of people are inclined to do right now, given everything that's going on in the world, your brain, no judgment, I'll just show you more of that. And when people say to me, but you don't understand, I'm not funny, there is nothing funny happening in my life. If that's your belief, that's your reality, and your brain will confirm that. But once we start rewiring your brain to start looking for and noticing the humor around you, and neurons fire together, and we have neuroplasticity. And then you reinforce that by looking some more more neuroplasticity. And then you look some more, and neurons that fire together wire together according to Hebb's law. And now you have circuitry in your brain that's working with you and for you all the time. And you're going to hear things and see things that other people don't notice. I was in a clothing store not too long ago, and I never saw the woman in the next dressing room. But as I'm trying on a pair of jeans, apparently the dress she was trying on was a little tight, because I heard her say, "Good Lord, if this dress fit me any tighter, it would fit me like a mammogram." That was the funniest thing I'd heard all day. I stopped putting on my jeans, and I stopped and wrote that down, which is another important point, because I put that note in my bag, and it wasn't until a few weeks later that I found it that I remembered. Because unless we reinforce it, especially in the early stages, we don't hang on to it. We have to reinforce those messages. And I know with the work that you do, you're looking for what's actionable and repeatable, repeat. And, then we have, that which is effective, repeatable, actionable, I believe is the phrase that you use. And I love that, because that's what I am doing with the strategic use of humor.
I'm gonna have to go back and listen to this and write that down about the neurons that fire together.
Neurons that fire together, wire together. Hebb's law, HEBB apostrophe S.
Yeah, so while you're Googling kids at home, it's also Zig Ziglar was a great inspirational salesperson. So, you can see at the top, I think was the book, if I remember correctly.
See you at the top. Yeah. He actually taught my son how to do a proper handshake. My son, Adam, came with me to a conference, and Zig and I were both being recognized at that conference. And Adam was maybe 12, and he got down on one knee and he said, he stuck out his hand, and Adam shook his hand and he goes, "No, son, here's how you do it," and he just pumped it. It was like, oh my gosh, my son has no idea how cool this moment is, that Zig Ziglar is teaching him how to shake a hand.
That's awesome. What a great experience for him.
Yeah.
So when you were first starting out in this kind of career path, were there some challenges you faced because you kind of alluded to it? I'm not funny. What if this lands wrong?
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges you had to overcome in trying to advocate for this use of humor in professional settings?
We have come quite a way, but especially in the beginning, this was seen as fluff. It was seen as light. It was a nice to have, but people didn't recognize the power that came with humor. And I really want to dissect this a little bit for you. One of the things that I identified over my last even just 10 years of research really opened something up for me and for the people whom I work with. And that is that humor has three purposes. We tend to think of the purpose of humor as being entertainment. I'm going to make you laugh. I'm going to entertain you. And the way we measure the success of that is how much we make the other person laugh. Now, if you are an entertainer, you're a comedian, you measure your success in LPMs, laughs per minute. And the more laughs per minute, the better you are. But I identified two other purposes behind humor. And I think if people get this, it's gonna really take them a quantum leap. And that is that two other purposes are influence and well-being. Well-being, we look at how can humor make somebody healthier? How can it lower their cortisol? How can it help them with heart disease, diabetes, memory issues, autoimmune disorders? For people who want to hear a whole spiel around this, I have a TED Talk on YouTube. Just put in my name in TED Talk and it'll come up. But we know that it can help make people healthier. Do we measure our success by how much we make them laugh? No, we measure the success by their level of health, of wellness, the quality of their health and well-being. The third, the one that I think is so important for the audience who is listening today, is influence. one of the purposes of humor is influence. How do we use humor to persuade? How do we use humor to educate? How do we use it to inspire? How do we use humor to negotiate? All of these things fall under that umbrella. And again, do we measure our success by how much we made the other person laugh? No, we measure the success by, did we achieve our goals? What's the quality and quantity of our relationships? And understanding that really is helping people identify that, oh, this really does have a purpose. This really can help me in my business. This really can help me in my leadership. And it's being recognized not so much as fluff now, but as an important social skill, an important leadership skill, a very important communication skill. And I'm just delighted that people are finally starting to get it, but we're not there yet. You know, there are still a lot of people thinking, well, that just doesn't sound like that could be possible. And that's one of the challenges for me, is that my mother told me when I was young, if it feels good, it's probably illegal, immoral, or fattening. And it was like, there's still this mindset that, it's too good to be true. But for those who embrace it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is the competitive edge. And, we don't have to be a mile ahead of our competition. We just need to be a little bit ahead of our competition, and to have this integrated into our teams, to have this integrated into our customer service experience, our sales experience, our leadership experience, really can help us just navigate and leverage the influence we have with others. And the outcome are things like likability. Robert Cialdini, one of his top principles in influence and persuasion. We can create trust. We can create that sense of relationship, rapport, bond. And humor can be used as a tool and as a weapon. So there are also guidelines, because when people come to me and say, but what if I cross the line? Here's the good news. There's no line. Here's the bad news. It's a moving target, and so over the years, I developed 7 competencies. And when leaders can recognize and embrace those competencies, now they have a tool that they can lead with. Now they have a tool that can really take their level of communication and influence up a quantum leap. And so it's not rocket science. I actually taught humor to NASA, so I did have to teach rocket scientists that humor is not rocket science, but I digress.
So I've taken quite a few notes. I want to follow up on some of these, but as you were chatting, you said we don't have to be ahead of our competition by a mile. And since as we're recording this, the Olympics are currently going on. In fact, 1,000th of a second is all you need to be ahead in some cases to win. Another thing that came to mind as you were speaking is there's a statement about, I don't always remember what you said, but I remember how you made me feel. And I feel like humor is one of those things that even if you're having to give bad news, you're not making light of it, but if you can create an environment where the person doesn't feel so negative about even the bad news that they're getting, right? So I think that's important. And I know personally, I use humor a lot in a very helpful way when I teach classes. So I teach a 2-day class on project management that's about 17 hours of content spread across 2 days. It's long 2 days, and it's butts and seats. And, project management, maybe not the sexiest topic in the world, right? But I use humor throughout to keep people engaged. Yes. And what I found is I can even plant a seed. I'll tell them early in the morning on day one, I'll say, look, I know this is not the sexiest topic in the world. And I tell a lot of jokes in the class. And if you don't laugh, it's a long 2 days for all of us. And of course, then people are, I'm expecting the humor. Then I'll say something like gratuitous laughter is appreciated. And then usually on day 2, when they're starting to really get tired, and I'll tell one of my jokes that I think is funny, nobody laughs. I say, well, y'all must be tired because that was clearly funny, in which case they're energized again. So you can use that humor to re-engage them and get them to their brains and their bodies the laughing does something I can't say the word, but it makes your body Thank you. Physiologically, it does something. It re-engages people and kind of wakes them up a little bit.
You are so spot on. And Clint, we're just moving you to the front of the class, because what you're showing is the use of strategic humor intentionally and consistently, which is the attributes of a high performer. And so I'm not surprised. And I'm like, ding, 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 ding. You're doing such a good job. Because, when we look at that from a brain perspective, what you're doing is you're setting up some expectations. We know of something called the anticipatory response, and our brains, again, particularly because we search for a threat, there's the anticipatory response where we start thinking about something that hasn't happened yet. And it's, taxes are coming up, or, it's the end of the quarter. Have we met our quota? Or, now it's time for inspection or whatever. And even though nothing has happened at the current moment, your body's already responding as if, because when we understand so much more about the brain right now that we really, from a brain perspective and the way that we create neurotransmitters, whether it's in the present or our brain is thinking about the future or our brain is stuck in the past, we are creating the chemicals in response to that. But Dr. Lee Burke and others made a really significant discovery that there is also the anticipatory response of humor. And when you are looking toward that, you are now setting up those expectations and you're changing the chemistry in their brain. You are lowering the resistance. You are making the material more memorable. When we are under pressure, when we're under stress, the very nature of our brains pulls from the prefrontal cortex and pulls it into the emotional limbic part of our brain. And when it does that, in essence, it makes us dumber. I mean, have you ever just been stressed out or under pressure and never made a bad decision? Have you ever said to yourself, what was I thinking? Well, here's the challenge. You weren't thinking because you weren't in the prefrontal cortex of your brain. And humor can help break down those barriers, even for a moment. When those students that you're teaching in this wonderful class are getting pressured, and our brains can only hold so much at the level that we can pay attention to. And when it starts getting crammed and overloaded and the brain doesn't know what to let go of, you have presented them with a micro break. It's like an Etch-a-Sketch. And now they're able to oh, okay. Even at a non-conscious level, they're thinking more clearly. They're paying more attention. And for people who are creating projects, for people who are managing projects, when you need people's full attention and engagement, periodically you just kind of need to shake that Etch-a-Sketch and clear out all the fog and the stuff that doesn't belong there and restore that bandwidth, if that makes sense.
It does. I mean, it's like you see the people that are working in the room, and if you're in a meeting session, not in a classroom necessarily, but in a meeting, and they're supposedly listening, but they're kind of taking notes, checking email, doing whatever. And then somebody will say something that's humorous or whatever, and the laughter just makes them stop what they're doing and look up and focus on, because I think we want that. We want, physically, it's good for us to feel that laughter. Yes,
it does. And laughter is under the umbrella of humor. I haven't really talked about that yet, but humor is a whole brain process that consists of cognitive, emotional, and physiological. So the cognitive is the wit part. Your brain is trying to determine, was that funny? Was that funny? It's like Sheldon on Big Bang Theory. Was that sarcasm? Then the limbic system is the emotional component. And that's that feeling of funny, that feeling of mirth. And then if we have a high enough threshold of that emotional feeling of mirth, or a high enough cognitive capacity of the feeling of wit, we stimulate the physiological part in our brain that evokes laughter. But you can have humor without laughter. I imagine there's a lot of folks, particularly in the field of engineering, that are probably looking at something humorous, and in their brain, they're thinking, my, that's funny, and this is why. And they're kind of dissecting it as they would and then analyzing it, but you might not know it by their face. And they may not, unless they're attuned to it, even recognize that feeling of mirth. And, they may or may not experience laughter. And you can have laughter without humor. We have a whole industry of laughter yoga or laughter clubs and people who laugh for no reason. Now, typically the simulated laughter becomes stimulated laughter, but many of the physiological responses occur whether it's a real laugh or a fake laugh. And so it's really interesting to me that there is this whole brain process. And to take it one step further, if you'll humor me, Dr. Lee Burke at Loma Linda, he's head of the research department now, was examining the brain waves of people in two groups. One was a group that was distracted by something very intense, like Saving Private Ryan. That's pretty intense. And then there was another group that was distracted by the observation of something humorous. And they got to pick, because what's funny for me might not be funny for you. So there was a selection that they could choose from. And what he found was that while both sides might be distracted from, the issue at hand or stress or whatever, it's like, oh, I don't want to think about something, so I'm going to go, watch Saving Private Ryan for whatever. But what he found was that in the brains of the people who were experiencing humor, there was a certain brainwave pattern that was seen. Now, before we had digital, back in analog, they saw this brainwave pattern and they thought that it was artifact. But with the technology that we have now, what Dr. Burke discovered was that these were gamma waves. And gamma waves are a whole brain activity. They unify all of the different parts of the brain. And when people are in a gamma wave brain pattern, they are in focus. They are in flow. They are just in that moment and their most, creative and focused self. And so this is, to me, just a very, very exciting time in this industry. And for leaders to recognize that I can use humor strategically to help bring them back into focus, to help bring them back into their utmost productivity, to bring them back into engagement, to bring them back to being not just a group of people, but a team, a cohesive unit. So I'm going to take a breath because you can tell I get a little excited about this.
That's what make it fun. Yeah. That's, I like, because I'm a big team guy, and I think that humor can help bring the team together. You've got several examples of that, I think, in your book, Leading with Levity, which is a great read, by the way, for those who are looking for something to read next on your list. Was there like a light bulb moment for you where you saw that that really solidified your belief in how humor can be assistance in leadership?
This is, it has kind of been a gradual, journey for me, but in terms of, people recognizing and responding, I think that for me, a light bulb moment was when I was coaching this gentleman from Australia, and to recognize that with a little bit of guidance, we were able to shift, because part of the story that I didn't share with you is that when we started looking at his experiences in his life, he said, I'm a serious person. That's just that's my makeup. He said, my parents were also very serious. And then he kind of chuckled. He goes, my wife is a very serious person. He said, even my 3 children, he said 2 of them, incredibly serious. The third one has Down syndrome, and he is a delight in laughing and in joy all the time. And what I realized at that moment was that he was wanting something from the outside to be able to help him be spontaneously funny. And what was really the defining moment for him and for me was when we realized one of the competencies is authenticity. This needs to come from the inside out. And it really shifted the way that I approach working with people and teaching humor, because I have a lot of colleagues and I admire them. And I think there is much truth to what they talk about when they talk about wanting to be able to be funny. And here's how you can add humor to the workplace. And here's how you can do those kinds of things. And then I think we have leaders who come in and they are thinking, oh, well, we need to add humor. And, they start throwing things in that aren't in alignment with them or with my team or with their teams. And then they wonder why it doesn't work. And it needs to be this authentic piece that comes from within. And that comes from really being more aware of what the humor is around you and intentionally tapping into that. And when leaders can have that intentionality and consistency in developing their own sense of humor, then the strategic humor that they're sharing with others, I think, is much, much more powerful. And, people, you're leading all the time, whether you want to or not. You are role modeling for people. And I remember one group that brought me into Chicago, and I spoke for the upper management, and I worked with them for a day. And they said, oh my gosh, this is so wonderful. You need to come back and address our entire company from management down to housekeeping. They said, we're going to bring you in over the course of 3 days. And I did, 4 or 5 presentations a day. I was just like, yak. But here was what really surprised me, because this was about 3 months after my initial conversation or work with them. On the evaluations, numerous people wrote, this was so incredibly helpful. I just wish my boss could have heard it. The bosses didn't come down. It was like, oh, been there, done that. We listened. And so they weren't role modeling that this was something that they saw as a significant skill. And obviously the mentality still was firings will continue until morale improves. So you go down and improve your morale and your attitude, and don't come back until you've switched it. And so that's not what leadership is about. Leadership is also role modeling, showing by example, being playful. One of the safest forms of humor is the ability to be able to laugh at yourself. And a lot of leaders are very resistant to that and very fearful of that because they don't want their people to think that they've made mistakes. Well, that was a different time and that was a different era. And in today's era, vulnerability is like gold. I mean, it's just because here's what happens with just a touch of vulnerability is that you are basically exposing yourself. And it's almost like a dog runs in the room and lays on his back and throws up its legs. And it's like, I'm being vulnerable. I'm safe, and I want to connect. And when leaders are willing to show a little bit of self-effacing humor and show the vulnerability, even at the non-conscious level, people are thinking, oh, I can feel safe. I have a sense of trust. Now there's caveat. You make fun of your actions and not who you are. Because you want people to think you made a mistake. You don't want people to think you are a mistake. But when you can use that self-effacing humor, that is such a powerful tool to learn how to really use that well.
So I think about it from a team perspective. What occurred to me as you were telling that story was that the boss's mate, they lost such a great opportunity to come down and be a part of this experience, even though they'd seen it already. But now they could have come down and been a part of it. It would have sent the message to the people in the room that they're also think it's funny. They're also getting it.
Yes.
And it's more of now it's no longer do as I say, not as I do. You actually doing it as well. So it was a missed opportunity for sure.
Spot on.
Well, that concludes part 1 of my conversation with Karyn Buxman. In part 2, we dive deeper into the art of engaging large audiences, explore the concept of the cognitive capacity cascade, and discuss how to avoid common pitfalls in communication. Karyn also shares valuable strategies for leveraging humor to enhance cognitive performance, along with insights in using humor effectively as a leader.
At the peak of a crisis, humor's typically going to fall flat. Too soon. And that emotional distance is different for different people. A leader needs to know how to measure that, has to develop a sense for what's right. And you're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. You know, if you do cross the line, you address it. It's like, wow, I really missed on that one. I apologize. That's not who I want to be. You know, that's not the kind of humor that we use in this organization or in our culture, and make it safe, because a lot of things that are totally fine, again, when your purpose is entertainment, not what you want to use and not the guidelines you want to give when your purpose is influence.
Thanks for listening to The Conversation. To find out more about Clint, go to ClintonMPaget.com and pick up Clint's book, How Teams Triumph, Managing by Commitment, at Amazon. The Conversation with Clinton M. Paget is a production of Forbes Books.